Hi, I'm Leslie Thompson, and I have a word of encouragement for you today. Actually, what I would like to share with you is how rotator cuff surgery can save your marriage. Now, the good news is that you don't have to have rotator cuff surgery. Your spouse doesn't have to go under the knife. You don't have to have a hip replacement or new knees put in. But I actually learned a very profound lesson about how to relate to your spouse when my husband had rotator cuff surgery a couple of years ago. And I was able to draw some pretty strong analogies from that I'd like to share. You know, the interesting thing about the surgery was that it was laparoscopic. And what that means is that they make really small incisions, just little half-inch incisions. They don't cut your shoulder wide open. And they go in with instruments through the small incisions and sew up the damaged tissues and basically do some repairs. Well, the great thing about laparoscopic surgery is that it leaves very small scars, almost no scars, and outwardly everything appears to be healed very quickly. You know, it can take a week or two of recovery with some ice packs and everything, but things look like they're better very fast. But of course, we all know after surgery that just because something may look better, it doesn't necessarily feel better. And what I witnessed with my husband was his shoulder looked fine. After a week or two, he didn't have to wear the arm sling anymore, and he was out and about meeting with business colleagues and friends. But his shoulder still really hurt, and that hurt was unseen. And sometimes it didn't even hurt unless somebody touched it. It might feel fine, but then if somebody came up and slapped him on the back and said hi, then it was extreme pain. And the analogy that I drew from that was that we each carry with us some deep-seated wounds, some emotional scars that sometimes just aren't visible, that sometimes really kind of creep up on us, take us by surprise, take our spouse by surprise. And they may have to do with financial issues. One person may be really, really sensitive to money issues and express a level of pain and of hurt that may not make sense to their spouse. But that pain is very real, and the emotional wounds that caused it may go back years, may go back to childhood. The wounds are still there, and the tenderness is still there. For other people, it may have to do with sex, based on their experiences when they were younger or in a previous marriage and other relationships. They may have a woundedness there that you need to be sensitive around. It can have to do with any number of things. It can have to do with how to raise children, or relationships with parents, or relationships with other friends, job pressures. But the thing to be mindful of is that if your spouse seems to have an extreme reaction to something, a reaction that seems out of the norm for you, that you don't really understand, it may be because there's a scar there, there's a wound, there was a cutting away, there was a deep cutting into that they may or may not be aware of, but there's a tenderness and there's a hurt there that if you can be mindful of and not take it all upon yourself that you have ownership of it, because you may or may not be the one who caused it, but to be mindful that the wound is still there. And if you can walk gingerly around it, treat that area with extra care. And again, whether it's finances, whether it's sex, whether it's relationship with parents, whatever that issue is, when you recognize that woundedness, when you recognize that hurt that happens, to treat that with special care in your conversations, in your interactions, and to just empathize and to understand there's a hurt there. I may not know how much it hurts. I may not be able to feel the same hurt because I didn't have the same wound. And I may not even I don't see any scars. I don't understand why you're reacting the way you do, but the scars are still there, and that's something very important to recognize in our relationship with our spouse, is that we each bring to the relationship our own life experience and our own emotional wounds, and our job is to edify and encourage and love our spouse through that healing process. Now here's some bonus material for you. When my husband went in for rotator cuff surgery, he hadn't just torn his rotator cuff. He went in to repair an old wound. His shoulder had hurt him for years. It had been causing problems for years. And at a certain point, when we live with a certain level of hurt, we make a decision about whether to go through the healing process and the rehabilitation process. And so, in a sense, it's elective surgery. And a lot of times when we're dealing with wounds from our past, when we're dealing with family history, when we're dealing with emotional wounds from childhood, it can be challenging to choose that elective surgery, to cut into that, to cut away the dead tissue, to cut away the emotional hurts and the spiritual hurts, with the ultimate goal of healing, with the ultimate goal of having it resolved once and for all. And so recognize too that as you're in your marriage, when you make a decision to cut away old hurts, whether they're from your marriage, past transgressions, past hurts that you've inflicted on each other, that healing process can create a fresh woundedness. And you need to be really gentle with each other and recognize that even in the process of healing, it's opening up new wounds. And those take time to heal too, and that's okay. And so I encourage you today to just be a blessing to your spouse, to love your spouse, to do the act of love toward your spouse. Not just say, I love you, but demonstrate that love with tenderness and care, with patience, with gentleness and kindness. And I pray a blessing over you and your marriage today. Thank you for joining me. God bless.